I remember the sound before I remember the sight. A hollow moan rising from the Atlantic, low and endless, like the breath of something that never sleeps. The sea in Maine doesn't whisper, it warns. And that morning, as the bus wound along the cliffs toward the old St. Marin Hospital, it felt like the ocean was calling my name through clenched teeth. I had promised myself that I wouldn't read into sounds anymore. I had promised logic, science, restraint. But grief makes you porous. It lets things in. Even now, I can still feel the salt on my lips when I first saw the hospital. It stood alone on the edge of the cliff, the color of aged bone, its windows dull with mist. The sign at the gate was half swallowed by rust. St. Marin Coastal Hospital, EST, 1886. Below it, the waves crashed against black rocks, sending up a spray that reached almost to the second floor. I remember thinking that the building looked less like a place of healing and more like a mausoleum left behind by the tide. When I stepped off the bus, the wind tore through my coat and filled my lungs with the taste of brine. The smell of seaweed and decay lingered in the air, so sharp it almost felt alive. Mia Chen was waiting for me by the entrance, wrapped in a navy blue cardigan, her dark hair pulled into a bun that the wind kept undoing. "You must be Dr. Vargas," she said, smiling in that polite way people smile when they don't yet know what kind of person you are. "Welcome to St. Marin. I hope you like the ocean." I told her I did. I lied. We walked through the lobby together, the sound of our shoes echoing over the marble floor. Everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp wood. Portraits of long-dead surgeons lined the walls, their faces blurred by years of salt air. Each seemed to follow me as I passed, their expressions grave, as if they knew the truth of why I was there. Not for a fresh start, not really. I came to forget, to bury. Mia led me down a corridor toward the surgical wing. The walls there were pale green, cracked in thin spiderweb lines, and the fluorescent lights flickered with an almost human pulse. "We don't get many transfers from New York," she said. "People don't usually come here to start over." "I needed quiet," I answered. She nodded. "You'll get plenty of that." At the end of the hall, we passed a closed metal door marked B3, restricted access. There was condensation around the edges, like the air behind it was colder. I slowed down, curious, but Mia's tone changed slightly when she noticed. "That's the basement wing," she said quickly. "Flooded years ago. The hospital was built too close to the cliffs. They sealed most of it off after an accident." "What kind of accident?" Her smile thinned. "I don't really know. Dr. Thorpe might." Dr. Harlan Thorpe. I had read about him before taking the position, a respected surgeon, head of the hospital, with 30 years of experience and a fondness for collecting medical antiques. I was supposed to report to him that afternoon. When I finally met him, he was in his office overlooking the sea. The room was filled with books and glass jars, each holding something pickled, floating, like small organs preserved in time. He was taller than I expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to dissect even before he spoke. "Dr. Vargas," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, dry, cold. "Welcome to St. Marin. You'll find our hospital unique." "That's one word for it," I said, glancing toward the window where fog pressed against the glass like breath. He smiled faintly. "The fog never leaves us. Some days it feels like the ocean itself wants in." I thought he was joking. Later I realized he was. That first night, I stayed in the staff quarters on the second floor, a narrow room with peeling wallpaper and a single window overlooking the cliffs. The sea was invisible beyond the fog, but I could hear it, waves slamming into rock, the long exhale of retreat, then the crash again, a rhythm like a heart that refused to stop beating. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept returning to New York, the crash, the shattered glass, the faces I'd never see again. Every sound from the hallway made me tense. The distant clink of metal trays, the hum of an old generator, the faintest whisper, as if someone were speaking underwater. At around 2 a.m., I got up and opened the window for air. That's when I saw it. A seagull, massive, almost unnaturally so, perched on the railing just a few meters away. Its feathers were mottled gray, its eyes the color of pale amber. It didn't move when I looked at it. It just stared, unblinking, head tilted slightly as though trying to remember me. The wind howled around us, but the bird was still, too still. Then, with a sudden crack of wings, it rose into the fog and vanished. I told myself it was nothing. But when I looked down at the railing the next morning, there were salt stains shaped like a handprint. The hospital came alive slowly each day, as if reluctant to wake. The patients were few, mostly elderly fishermen, their skin marked by years of salt and sun. One of them, Liam, had been admitted a month before I arrived. The nurses said he had been pulled from the harbor after some kind of seizure. When I checked his chart, the cause read simply, exposure to contaminated water. But there was something else in his file, a handwritten note in Dr. Thorpe's spidery script. Subject prone to auditory hallucinations. Reports of voices beneath the tide. Keep under observation. That day I met Liam in his room. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and his skin carried a faint sheen as if perpetually damp. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. "You're new," he said. "You haven't heard them yet." "Heard who?" He looked past me, toward the window where fog drifted against the glass. "The ones under the waves. They call to anyone who listens too long." I wanted to dismiss it as delirium. I almost did. But when I touched his wrist to check his pulse, his skin was cold, colder than it should have been. That night I dreamed of the ocean again. Only this time there was a door beneath it, iron, ancient, half buried in sand, and something behind it was breathing. When I woke, the sound of waves was gone, replaced by something softer, a whisper, my name. "Elena." I used to believe that silence was the same as peace, that if I could find a place quiet enough, far from the sirens, the traffic, the screaming memories, I might finally stop hearing the echoes of that night. But silence is deceptive. It doesn't heal, it listens. It waits until you're still enough for it to whisper back. By the end of my first week at St. Marin, I had learned the sound of its silence. It wasn't true quiet. It was layered, like sediment at the bottom of the sea. Beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the creak of wood, I could hear something deeper, older. A vibration in the walls. A heartbeat that wasn't mine. The days were uneventful, almost tediously so. The hospital had fewer than a dozen patients, mostly elderly, their cases mundane. The storm outside kept most locals away, and fog rolled so thick across the cliffs that even the lighthouse disappeared by afternoon. Yet there was an undercurrent, something about the air, heavy with salt and stillness, that made everyone speak softer than usual, as though afraid to wake something sleeping. Mia and I grew close quickly. She was younger than me by almost 10 years, with a nervous laugh and a habit of humming when she was uneasy. We often shared late-night coffee in the staff lounge, a cramped room with a flickering vending machine and one window that looked directly out to the ocean. "It gets inside your head, doesn't it?" she said one night, watching the waves through the glass. "What does?" "The sea." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "After a while you start hearing things. It's like it's speaking under the noise, especially near the basement." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the flooded section?" She nodded. "Sometimes when the tide's high you can hear water moving down there, but there shouldn't be any connection to the ocean, not that deep inland." I smiled faintly, trying to sound rational. "Old pipes, acoustics, you know how sound travels through metal." "Maybe," she didn't look convinced, "or maybe the sea just finds its way in." There was a tremor in her voice, one that stayed with me even after we parted ways that night. The next morning, I met Dr. Thorpe during his rounds. He moved through the hallways like a ghost, soft-spoken, deliberate, almost reverent toward the building. He never raised his voice, but somehow it always felt like he was the one everyone listened to. He stopped by Liam's room with me. The patient was awake, staring at the ceiling, muttering softly. I caught fragments of his words: door, pressure, calling. Thorpe leaned close to his bed. "He's been talking like that since the storm began," he said. "Says he dreams of drowning, though his lungs are clear." When Liam noticed me, he whispered, "The water's coming up through the floor. Don't you hear it?" I tried to reassure him, but Thorpe's eyes flicked to me sharply, as if to warn me not to feed the delusion. He placed a hand on the patient's arm and said, "Rest now. The sea can't reach you here." But something in the way he said it, calm, almost tender, made it sound like he wasn't entirely certain. That evening, the fog returned thicker than ever. From my window, I could barely see the courtyard lamp below. The hospital seemed suspended in white nothingness, as if the world beyond its walls had vanished entirely. I decided to walk the halls, more to escape my thoughts than for any real purpose. The corridors were dim, lit only by a few buzzing fixtures. My footsteps echoed, soft but endless. When I reached the far end near the restricted basement door, I noticed a faint dampness underfoot. The tiles were slick, reflecting a sheen of moisture. I crouched down. It wasn't just condensation, it smelled faintly of salt. Then I heard it. A sound beneath me, muffled but rhythmic. A thud like something striking metal from below, once, twice, then silence. I froze. The logical part of me, the surgeon, the scientist, searched for explanations. Old plumbing, shifting foundation, pressure from trapped air. But none of those made sense in that steady, deliberate cadence. When I stood, I realized I wasn't alone. Mia was at the far end of the hall, holding a clipboard to her chest. Her face was pale. "You heard it too," she said quietly. I nodded. "What's down there, really?" Her eyes darted toward the metal door marked B3. "You should ask Dr. Thorpe," she murmured. "But he won't tell you everything. He says the basement, been sealed since the flood 10 years ago. But sometimes I think it's not the water that wants out." Her words hit me harder than they should have. I laughed softly, trying to dispel the unease, but the sound felt wrong in that empty corridor. We walked back together, neither of us speaking. Behind us, the hall was silent, but I could swear I still felt the vibration under the soles of my shoes. Later that week, during a power outage, I had my first real glimpse of the hospital's shadow. It happened around midnight. The storm outside had intensified, the kind that made the walls tremble. The lights flickered once, twice, then went black entirely. Emergency generators kicked in after a few seconds, casting everything in a dim red glow. I left my room to check on the patients, flashlight in hand. The air felt thicker, charged. As I passed the surgical wing, a draft rushed through, cold and wet, carrying the scent of salt. The beam of my flashlight caught droplets on the floor like a trail. I followed it. The droplets led toward the basement door. The B3 restricted access sign was swaying slightly, though there was no wind. The handle glistened with condensation. My hand trembled when I reached out, not sure why. When I touched the metal, it was ice cold, too cold, like something breathing on the other side. And then faintly I heard it again, the whisper. "Elena." I stepped back so fast the flashlight slipped from my grasp and clattered against the floor. When I picked it up, the sound was gone. Only the hum of the generator remained. But when I looked again, I noticed something new, etched into the condensation on the door. A single word, written in a trembling finger. "Open." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the fog roll in thicker than ever. The sea was invisible, but I could feel its pulse in the walls. When Mia knocked on my door at sunrise, her face was drawn and pale. "You look awful," she said. "I didn't sleep." "Neither did I." She hesitated, then handed me something wrapped in cloth, a small pouch tied with red string. "My grandmother gave this to me before I left Hong Kong," she said, "for protection. Salt, sage, and something she called the eye of the sea." I looked at her, unsure how to respond. "Humor me," she said softly. "Just keep it with you." I took it. The pouch was warm against my palm, though the morning air was cold. "Do you believe in that sort of thing?" I asked. Mia's eyes flicked toward the window where the fog pressed thick and unyielding. "I didn't," she said. "Not until I came here." That evening I went to check on Liam again. He was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, his hands trembling. "They're closer," he whispered. "You can hear them when the tide's high. The voices come through the pipes now." Before I could respond, the intercom system crackled overhead. Static filled the air, then a sound, not quite a voice, not quite the sea, a low, drawn-out breath that seemed to ripple through the entire building. The lights flickered once more. Liam looked at me, his eyes wide. "It's knocking," he said. I wanted to tell him he was imagining it, that the world obeyed rules, that the sea stayed where it belonged. But then, faintly, from deep below us, I heard the same sound as before. A thud. Slow, measured, waiting. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if it was coming from under the hospital. Sleep became a foreign country, one I could no longer enter without fear. Every night, as the fog wrapped the hospital like wet gauze, the same dream returned. I would be standing on the shoreline barefoot, the tide pulling at my ankles. There was no horizon, only water and shadow stretching infinitely. Then, beneath the surface, I'd see it, a shape of metal, circular and ancient, covered in barnacles and coral. A door. And from behind it came the sound of breathing, slow, measured, patient. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the sound of waves echoed faintly inside my head, as though my skull were a shell. I started avoiding sleep altogether, burying myself in paperwork and patient charts. Logic became my shield. I reviewed every case in St. Marin's archive, but soon realized the records were incomplete. Whole years were missing, particularly the ones between 1975 and 1980, marked only with the word transferred to Colonial Archive. It was during one of these long nights in the records room that I found the file. A small folder tucked behind a stack of outdated X-rays. Its label was faded, but I could just make out the words, "Basement Project, 1887. Inside were only 3 pages. The first, a hand-drawn map of the hospital's foundation. The second, a list of names, all marked deceased. And the third, a short note written in ink that had bled over time. The experiment failed. The containment must not be disturbed. The voice deceives. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, and below the text a single word had been underlined twice, seal. A rational mind would have dismissed it as superstition, notes from a forgotten experiment long before modern medicine. But something in those words, "the voice deceives," pressed cold fingers around my heart, because I had heard it too in my dreams. Dr. Thorpe found me the next morning, sitting in the records room with the folder still open. "You're up early," he said lightly, though his tone carried an edge. His eyes flicked to the file. "Ah, so you've met our ghosts." "Ghosts? Every hospital has them," he said, closing the folder gently, almost protectively. "But St. Marin's are older than most." He placed the folder under his arm and smiled in that thin, unreadable way of his. "You're a woman of science, Dr. Vargas. Don't let the sea play tricks on your mind. It has a way of drowning logic." He turned to leave, but I stopped him. "What happened to the basement, really?" He paused at the door. For a moment I thought he might tell me the truth, but instead he said softly, "The hospital was built on unstable ground. The lower levels flooded decades ago. You do well to stay clear of them." Then he left, the echo of his footsteps receding down the corridor. The moment he was gone, I noticed something strange. The faint outline of moisture spreading from the spot where the folder had been resting. The wood beneath it glistened, damp, salty. That evening the weather turned violent. The sea roared against the cliffs, shaking the windows. Mia and I were the only ones on call, Most of the staff had left early due to the storm. I could feel the building vibrate, the way a ship might strain against waves. I found Mia in the hallway, staring at a puddle that hadn't been there minutes before. "It's coming through the walls," she whispered. "Look." Water dripped from the ceiling tiles, slow and deliberate. The air smelled of rust and seaweed. We followed the sound to the surgical wing, directly above the basement access. The dripping became a steady trickle, then a rush. The lights flickered again, briefly cutting out. In the darkness, I heard the faintest sound, not the creak of pipes or the moan of wind, but something that spoke. "Elena." The whisper was unmistakable, curling through the air like a breath against my ear. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught the wall, and there, for a moment, I saw it. A handprint, wet, pressed from inside the plaster. Mia gasped. "It's not supposed to." Before she could finish, a loud crash echoed below us. The floor trembled, then silence again. We didn't go down. We didn't have to. The sound came again a minute later, 3 sharp knocks, each one reverberating through the entire building. Thud, thud, thud. Mia grabbed my arm. "We have to tell Thorpe." But I wasn't so sure anymore that Thorpe didn't already know. When the storm finally broke near dawn, I walked outside for the first time in days. The air was heavy with the scent of sea salt and ozone. The courtyard was littered with feathers, white and gray, tangled in puddles. And then I saw it. The seagull again, or maybe another like it, massive, ghostly pale, standing by the edge of the cliff. Its chest rose and fell slowly, as if breathing with the sea. It looked at me for a long time, unblinking. Then it opened its beak and let out a low, mournful cry. The sound wasn't quite a bird's call. It was closer to a warning. Behind it, far down the cliffs, I could see where the waves had carved new scars into the rock. And there, half revealed by retreating water, something metallic glinted faintly beneath the foam. A curve of iron, a circle. The dream's image, the door. I froze, my heart hammering. It was real. That night when I told Mia what I'd seen, she went pale. "There's a story," she said quietly. "Local legend. My grandmother heard it from a fisherman who used to work near here. They said the first settlers built the hospital over an old fortress, a place where they kept something they couldn't destroy, something that came from the sea." I wanted to laugh, but the words wouldn't come. "Maybe it's just folklore," she said, "but if it is..." We sat in silence for a long time, the wind rattling the windows. Somewhere below us, faint and rhythmic, came that same patient sound. Thud. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't pipes. It was knocking. And when I finally drifted into sleep near dawn, the dream came again, but this time it was different. The water was higher, the tide reaching my chest. The iron door loomed before me, its surface alive with movement. And from behind it the voice spoke clearly for the first time, deep, calm, inhuman. "Open the way, Elena." I tried to turn away, but the sea rose faster, filling my mouth, my lungs. I could taste salt and rust. Then through the water I saw another figure, tall, shrouded, moving behind the door. A man-shaped shadow, but its eyes glowed faintly, like lanterns drowned too long. It raised its hand and pressed it against the other side of the metal. I woke choking, gasping for breath. My window was open, curtains thrashing in the wind. On the floor beside my bed lay the small pouch Mia had given me, its red string torn open, salt scattered across the boards. And from somewhere deep within the hospital, below the floorboards and the sea-slick stones, came a final echo. A voice, soft but unmistakable. "It begins." 7 years had passed since the night the sea first spoke to me. I used to count time by the tide, but somewhere along the line, the rhythm blurred. The waves no longer sounded like the ocean. They sounded like breath, slow and deliberate, rising through the cracks of the hospital's foundation. St. Marin had grown quieter. Most of the old staff were gone. The younger ones never stayed long. They said the hospital was dying, that it belonged to the sea again. The funding had dried up, the patients fewer, the walls damp and peeling. But I stayed. I told myself it was duty. Someone had to keep this place alive. But deep down, I knew the truth. Leaving felt impossible. Like there was a thread running from the foundations into my chest, pulling me back each time I tried to imagine life beyond the cliffs. Mia left 3 years ago. She didn't even say goodbye in person, just a note. You can't save it, Elena. It's not meant to be saved. Sometimes, I still hear her voice in the hallways when the lights flicker. The sea air had become heavier lately, thick with rot. Some mornings, mist rolled through the corridors, clinging to the walls like breath. We called it the sweat of the building. I started noticing small things, footprints in the dust where no one had walked, doors that opened themselves, a faint humming beneath the floor. The old janitor, Ruiz, said it was the pipes. But when I asked him why the sound stopped every time I entered a room, he just shrugged. Dr. Thorpe had changed too. His hair was thinner, his hands unsteady, but his eyes, those remained the same, pale and sharp as a scalpel. He spent most of his days locked in the archives now, muttering to himself as if reciting names. When I knocked once, he didn't open the door. He only said, "It's too late, Elena. The seal weakens." I pretended not to hear. I pretended I didn't know what he meant. It was around that time that the water stains began. At first they were small, a dark patch near the stairs, a shimmer beneath the wallpaper. Then they spread, climbing upward, forming patterns like veins. One night I stayed late in Ward C, reviewing charts under the dying hum of fluorescent lights. The air smelled metallic, like rust and salt. I was halfway through a report when I heard it. A drip, then another, slow, steady. I turned. From the ceiling above the empty bed, a single drop fell, splashing onto the white sheet. I moved closer, expecting to see a leak, but the ceiling was dry. The water seemed to come from nowhere, seeping from the plaster itself. It wasn't clear either. It was pale gray, almost luminous, and it shimmered faintly as it pooled. Without thinking, I touched it. Cold, too cold. And in that instant, only for a heartbeat, I saw something in the reflection of the puddle, a shape standing behind me, tall, silent, watching. When I turned, the room was empty. But the water was gone. The next morning, I confronted Thorpe again. "You knew about this," I said. "The water, the stains, the dreams." He looked at me for a long time, his lips trembling as though weighing words too heavy to speak. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't have touched it." "What is it?" "The remainder of what we buried," he whispered. "The sea remembers, it always remembers." He turned away, staring out the window where the fog pressed thick against the glass. "We thought the foundation would hold. We were wrong. The door below doesn't keep things out, it keeps them in. And it's opening." I felt my throat close. "The door, it's real." His eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I'd never seen before, terror. Real enough to drown us all. That night I dreamed again. This time I wasn't standing on the shore. I was underneath it, walking through a corridor of stone and coral, the walls pulsing like veins. My feet sank into soft silt, my hands brushed rusted iron. At the end of the corridor stood the door. Only now it was open. Beyond it stretched a vast, dark expanse, a pressure that wasn't water but will. And from within, the whisper came again. "You are the key, Elena." I tried to move, to scream, but my lungs filled with salt. Something reached through the doorway, a hand, slick and gray, its fingers webbed, nails like shards of shell. It touched my face, and I felt my heart slow, as though sinking to another rhythm entirely. When I woke, I was standing in the hallway outside the records room, barefoot. My clothes were damp, hair dripping seawater. A trail of footprints led back toward my office. Inside, the walls were wet. The same gray liquid dripped from the ceiling, pooling near the desk. In the center of the puddle lay the folder, the same one Thorpe had taken years ago. Its cover was warped, swollen from moisture. The ink had run, but one phrase was still legible, scrawled in the same antique hand. "The voice is not what it claims." By morning, Thorpe was gone. His office was empty, desk cleared, personal items missing. But when Ruiz checked the logs, he found no record of anyone leaving the building that night. And yet someone had written in the staff book, in Thorpe's precise script, "Seal compromised, containment breached, prepare the descent." The page was dated for tomorrow. I didn't sleep after Thorpe disappeared. The sea was louder that night, crashing against the cliffs with the rhythm of a heartbeat. I sat by the window of my quarters, watching the fog roll in from the water. The mist looked alive, curling, reaching, almost breathing. I thought about Thorpe's last words, "Prepare the descent." What did he mean? There were no lower levels below the basement, at least none that appeared on the blueprints. But this hospital had always lied. By dawn, I made up my mind. I had to find whatever he was talking about. The next day, I went looking for Ruiz. He was the only one left who knew the building's bones. I found him in the generator room, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his eyes red from lack of sleep. When I told him I wanted to check the sub-basement, he didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, expression hollow. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't go down there, Doc, not since the flood." "What flood?" He wiped his hands on his overalls, avoiding my gaze. "The one before you came. The water came up through the floor like the ocean was crawling inside. They sealed it, poured concrete, said it was handled, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" He looked at me then, his face pale. "Sometimes I hear knocking down there." We went together after nightfall. The hospital was different in the dark. The corridors felt longer, the lights flickered like candle flames, and every sound echoed back a little too late, like something was imitating us. Ruiz led the way, holding a flashlight that buzzed with dying batteries. We passed through the morgue, cold, empty, the metal tables gleaming like mirrors, and down a narrow stairwell behind the storage wing. At the bottom, a heavy door waited, rusted, swollen from years of moisture. A faded sign above it read, "Authorized personnel only." "This is it," Ruiz whispered. "They said the lower level's sealed. You can still smell the salt if you get close." He was right. The air grew damp, sharp, like the breath of the sea itself. I pressed my palm to the metal door. It was cold, too cold, and beneath it I felt something faint, a vibration, like something alive on the other side. Ruiz stepped back. "You're not opening that, are you?" But I already was. The hinges screamed as I forced it open. Beyond was a narrow stairwell descending into blackness. The walls were stone, not concrete, and slick with condensation. Water dripped from somewhere unseen, echoing down the steps like distant footsteps. We descended slowly, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The air grew colder, heavier. My breath came out in white plumes. Halfway down, Ruiz stopped. "Do you hear that?" At first I thought it was the sea again, but then I realized it wasn't waves, it was breathing, slow, deep, coming from below. I wanted to turn back. I should have. But something inside me, the same pull that had kept me here all these years, urged me forward. At the bottom we found the lower hall. The floor was uneven, the air thick with the scent of iron and rot. Old pipes lined the ceiling, and strange symbols were carved into the walls, some half-erased by mold. Ruiz ran his hand along one of them. "Never seen this before. Looks old." "Older than the hospital," I said. "Maybe even older than the town." A faint light glimmered ahead. We followed it through a narrow corridor until we reached a metal bulkhead, different from the rest, cleaner, newer. Someone had tried to seal it with bolts and chains. But the chains were snapped. The bolts bent outward as if something had pushed from the other side. Ruiz cursed under his breath. What the hell happened here? There were markings on the door, written in chalk, half washed away by moisture. 3 words. Do not listen. I leaned closer, and that's when I heard it, faint at first, almost like the wind through pipes, then clearer. A whisper. Elena. I froze. The voice came from the other side of the bulkhead, familiar, soft, female. It was Mia's voice. Help me, Elena, please. I felt the blood drain from my face. It can't be. Ruiz's flashlight flickered violently, the beam shaking. Doc, that ain't her. The whisper grew stronger, filling the corridor. I could almost feel it brushing against my ear. You left me down here. You left us all. Ruiz grabbed my arm. We're leaving now. But I couldn't move. The sound rooted me in place, the words twisting into something deeper, wetter. I could hear the tide in them, the slow draw and crash of water against stone. I stepped closer. The surface of the door was slick, pulsing faintly. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't mine. Its eyes were black, hollow, filled with waves. Open it, the voice said. Let me see you again. Ruiz shouted something behind me, something about the floor, but it was too late. The ground cracked. Water burst from beneath our feet, freezing cold and foul. The flashlight dropped, spinning across the floor, and in the momentary flashes of light, I saw something move beneath the surface, like a face pressing up through the water. Ruiz dragged me back up the stairs, shouting prayers in Spanish. The water followed, spilling upward as if the ocean itself were climbing to catch us. We slammed the door shut and collapsed against it, gasping. The metal was warm now, throbbing faintly like a living heart. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Ruiz whispered, "It knows your name." I didn't tell him that I heard it again that night, after he left. From the walls of my room, from the drain in the sink, from the sea beyond the glass. Elena, the door is open. But when I went to the window, the fog outside wasn't fog at all. It was breathing. For 3 nights after the descent, I barely slept. The walls whispered when I closed my eyes. The pipes sighed like lungs. Even the silence had a pulse. I stopped trusting the mirrors. Each morning, I'd wake to find the condensation on the glass shaped like fingerprints, long, wet streaks that trailed toward the floor. I'd wipe them away, only for them to reappear hours later. I told myself it was exhaustion. But the truth was simpler. Something had followed me back. I found Thorpe's office sealed. His nameplate was gone, but the door was unlocked, as if it had been waiting for me. The air inside smelled of iodine and damp paper. His desk was bare, except for one thing, an old folder wrapped in waxed cloth, tied with a thin strip of rope. My name was written across it. Not typed, handwritten, in Thorpe's narrow surgical script. I untied it with shaking hands. Inside were fragments, photocopies of ship logs, colonial records, medical charts, all marked with the hospital's name, but centuries older than the building itself. The oldest document was dated 1693. A letter written in archaic English caught my eye. The thing beneath the shore must never breathe again. The seal will hunger, and it will tempt the bloodline of the witness. We leave the burden to them until the sea forgets. The bloodline of the witness. The word struck something deep, cold inside me. Tucked beneath the letter was a photograph, a recent one. A woman standing by the cliffside, her hair whipping in the wind. She looked like me, too much like me. On the back, Thorpe had written, "Vargas, descendant confirmed." My stomach turned. I remembered stories my grandmother used to tell me in Mexico, about a healer in her family line who fled the coast of the north, cursed by the sea. I'd always dismissed them as folklore. But now it felt like the past had found me. That night the storm came. It began with a roar so deep it rattled the glass. Then the rain came sideways, slamming against the walls. The power flickered, then died. The hospital became a skeleton of shadows and candlelight. Ruiz came to my office, pale and drenched. "The lower level's flooding," he said. "Water's coming up from the floor again, smells like the bay." We took our flashlights and went. The corridor to the basement was half submerged already, water up to our ankles. Every step echoed, and sometimes, when the light shifted, I thought I saw faces beneath the surface. Open eyes, hair drifting like seaweed. By the time we reached the bulkhead, it was worse. The door bulged inward as if the ocean pressed right against it. Water leaked through the cracks, hissing softly. The chalk words, "Do not listen," were gone, washed away. "Thorpe's down there," Ruiz muttered. "I can feel it." I didn't answer, because I could feel it too. Not Thorpe, something else. The same pulse that haunted my dreams, the rhythm of the tide, the rhythm of my own heart. Then it spoke again. "Elena." The voice was clearer now, no longer whispering. It filled the hall, resonant, commanding, but still somehow intimate. "You know who I am." The sound came not just from beyond the door, but from within the water itself. Each ripple carried syllables, each drop a breath. "You carry my echo, you always have." Ruiz stepped back, crossing himself. "Doc, whatever that is, it's not God." I couldn't move. My flashlight trembled, the beam catching something under the water, a reflection that wasn't my own. Eyes black, depthless, looking up. "You lost your child to the sea, didn't you?" My breath caught. "The river took her, but I was there watching. I could give her back, Elena. I could give them both back." For a moment the storm vanished. The hospital, the dripping walls, all of it faded, and I was back in that car years ago, the night of the crash. The smell of gasoline, the glass raining like ice. My daughter's hand slipping from mine in the dark. "Just open the door," the voice whispered. "One door for another." A sound tore through me, half sob, half scream. I dropped the flashlight and fell to my knees. Ruiz grabbed my shoulders, shouting something I couldn't hear. The door began to breathe. The metal flexed, pushing outward with each exhale, releasing bursts of salt air and the stench of decay. Ruiz pulled me away, dragging me up the stairs as the floor began to quake. The water rose fast, swirling black and thick. Somewhere beneath the noise, I heard Thorpe's voice, distant, desperate. "It's awake, it's awake." And then the bulkhead split open with a metallic shriek. We barely made it out. The hospital shook as if the cliffs themselves were cracking apart. Alarms screamed. The lights exploded. I remember running, Ruiz beside me, shouting prayers, and the sound of rushing water behind us, filling the halls like 1,000 lungs exhaling at once. When we reached the main floor, I turned back. The sea was inside now, flooding through corridors, swallowing everything it touched. And yet beneath the chaos, I could hear it still. You can't run from your own reflection. Later, when the storm passed, I woke in the infirmary. Ruiz was gone. No one knew if he'd made it out. The hospital was silent, waterlogged, the air thick with salt and smoke. I wandered the corridors, half in shock, until I reached the window overlooking the cliffs. Dawn was breaking. In the distance, over the ocean, I saw it, a shape rising through the mist, a figure standing on the rocks. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Thorpe. Then it turned toward me, and I saw that its face was mine. The hospital should have been empty. The evacuation was ordered 2 nights ago, emergency flooding, unstable foundation, risk of collapse. But when I walked the halls now, the lights still flickered, machines still hummed. As if the place refused to die. I didn't remember how I got back. One moment I was standing at the edge of the cliffs, watching the sea swallow the dawn. The next I was here again, dripping salt water onto the tiles, the smell of rust and ocean in my lungs. The air was thick, heavy with something old and breathing. I think the building was calling me. Every corridor felt different now. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of moisture spreading through plaster like infection. The floorboards swelled and groaned underfoot as though something below was shifting, stretching. I passed the surgical ward, where the ceiling had collapsed inward. A gurney floated in ankle-deep water, spinning slowly in the current. Instruments hung from the rafters like silver vines. As I walked, I heard the echo of footsteps behind me. Slow, measured. When I turned, no one was there. Only the sound of dripping water, and somewhere in the distance, a door creaking open by itself. I found what was left of Ruiz in the hallway outside Ward C. At least I think it was him. His flashlight lay beside him, still glowing weakly. The rest was wrong. His skin was pale, swollen, seaweed threaded through his hair. His mouth hung open, filled with salt crystals. But his eyes were still moving, tracking me. "Ruiz," my voice broke, "can you hear me?" Something inside him shifted. A ripple moved beneath his skin like a current. Then, in a wet, rattling voice, he said, "He's waiting." I stumbled back. "Who?" He smiled, and the sound that came out wasn't human. "The one below." Then his body collapsed inward, dissolving into a dark puddle that smelled of the ocean. I didn't scream. There was no point. By the time I reached the lower stairwell, the water was waist-deep. The lights flickered above me, casting long shadows across the walls. The door to the sub-basement was already open, the metal twisted outward, as though something had forced its way through. The smell of salt and rot was overwhelming. I could hear the whispering again, dozens of voices overlapping, some weeping, some laughing softly. They came from below, rising like the tide. I held the flashlight tight, even though its beam had begun to fail. The steps were slick. My reflection in the water rippled as I moved, but sometimes it didn't ripple the same way I did. Once, halfway down, my reflection turned its head before I did. At the bottom of the stairs, I found room 317. It shouldn't have been there. That room belonged upstairs, 3rd floor, east wing. But here it was, the same number burned into the corroded plaque, the same heavy door, the same sensation of being watched from the other side. I shone my light on it. The paint bubbled and hissed where the beam touched. Something inside the room shifted. A low hum began, soft, melodic, like a lullaby hummed underwater. My chest tightened. I recognized it. It was the song I used to sing to my daughter before bed. "You remember, don't you?" The voice was behind me now, and in front of me, and inside my head all at once. "You carried me in your blood. I carried your grief in mine. Let's finish what began." I pressed my back to the wall. "What are you?" "You already know." The surface of the door shimmered like liquid metal, and for an instant I saw through it. A corridor of black water, stretching endlessly. Figures suspended in the depths, swaying like kelp. And at the end of it, a shape, vast, coiled, faceless, breathing in slow, tidal rhythm. The same pulse that had haunted me for years. The same rhythm that matched my heart. Then faintly, through the noise, I heard another voice. Weak, familiar. "Elena, close it." "Thorpe." His voice was muffled, strained, coming from inside the room. I staggered forward, shouting, "Where are you?" "Don't open it, it wants you to." The hum grew louder, drowning him out. My flashlight went out completely, and the dark turned thick, tactile. I could feel it pressing against my skin, sliding into my ears, my mouth, filling me with a taste like rust and memory. "You think you can stop it," the voice said. "You are its heir, its vessel. You were born for this." The metal began to bend, slow and deliberate, as if breathing. I felt heat radiate from it now, waves of fevered energy. The same hum that once lulled my child to sleep was now tearing through my skull. I reached for the symbols Thorpe had left, the sigil etched into the floor. My hands trembled as I traced it, whispering words I didn't understand, words that came from somewhere deep in my blood. The door screamed, a sound like the sea itself convulsing. The water around me surged upward, nearly knocking me off my feet. My vision blurred. I could see faces in the foam, Mia, Ruiz, Thorpe, my daughter, all calling my name in a single, awful harmony. I pressed my palms to the sigil. The light beneath it flared, white, blinding like lightning under glass. And then silence. No hum. No voice. Just the sea receding. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The room was gone, the stairwell gone. Only an empty, flooded hallway remained, water reflecting the pale dawn light seeping through the cracks above. The tide was leaving. But as I turned to go, I saw something glimmer beneath the surface, a reflection that didn't move. It smiled. I don't remember walking out of the hospital. One moment I was standing in the flooded hallway, the next I was outside. The sea stretched before me like an open wound. The cliffs were bleeding sunlight. The wind howled with voices that weren't the wind. The ocean was rising. It was no longer blue. It was black, thick, trembling, pulsing like a living thing. The tide reached the foundations of the hospital, clawing at its walls as if to reclaim what was always its own. And above it all, in the distance where the horizon should have been, something vast moved beneath the surface, coiling, uncoiling. I felt it inside me, in the rhythm of my heartbeat. It wasn't just the sea, it was the source. It was what Thorpe had been searching for. What Mia had drowned for. What I had been born for. The air was heavy with salt and static. I could taste blood in it. A figure stood at the edge of the pier, bent, pale hair clinging to his skull like wet paper. Thorpe. He turned when I approached, and the look in his eyes was the look of a man who had seen too much and understood too little. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "I didn't," I whispered. "It brought me." Thorpe laughed, a dry, broken sound that dissolved into coughing. "It always does." He looked toward the horizon. "Do you see it now, the thing beneath the tide?" I nodded. "That's not the sea," he said. "That's memory, all of it, every grief ever buried, every name ever spoken and forgotten. It wants form, and it chose you to give it one." I stepped closer. "Why me?" Thorpe's eyes softened, pity perhaps, "because you were the first to listen." The ground trembled. A wave struck the pier, swallowing half of it in a heartbeat. Water surged up around us, swirling with shards of glass and bone. I grabbed the railing to stay upright. From the churning black water, hands began to rise, pale, translucent, reaching. I recognized some of them. The long fingers of Ruiz, the delicate hands of Mia, even the small, soft shape of my daughters. "Mommy," she whispered. The sound broke me open. Her voice was clear, echoing not through air but through my skull, the same voice that had called from the walls, from the dreams. "It's okay," she said. "It doesn't hurt here." Thorpe shouted something, but I barely heard him. The sea's voice drowned everything else. It was calling my name now, Elena, stretched and distorted, 1,000 mouths whispering it at once. The horizon cracked open. It wasn't light that came out, it was something deeper, older. A shimmer, a pulse like the breath of the earth itself. The ocean began to rise, forming a wall of liquid glass that towered above us, frozen in impossible suspension. Within it, I saw cities drowned and forgotten, people sleeping in the depths, their eyes open, their mouths moving silently. Thorpe fell to his knees, screaming words that broke apart in the wind. His skin blistered under the glow. "Close it, Elena. You have to close it." But I knew it wasn't a door anymore. It was me. Every beat of my heart sent ripples through the surface of the water. Every breath I took changed the tide. I could feel it, the boundary between flesh and wave dissolving. The sea wasn't reaching for me. It was mirroring me. "Do you remember the night she died?" the voice asked. I froze. The waves slowed. The world around me dimmed, as if reality itself was waiting for the answer. I remembered the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic and rain, my daughter's hand in mine growing colder with every hour. And that final heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, the same rhythm that had haunted me since. That wasn't death, the voice said. That was the beginning. I saw it then, the pattern repeating through everything. The tides, the pulse, the hum in the walls, the lullaby I had sung to her. It wasn't a melody of comfort, it was a summoning. I had been carrying the ocean inside me all along. Thorpe tried to reach me. His hand touched my arm, and the skin beneath his fingers dissolved into water. Elena, don't. But his voice broke apart, scattered like foam. His body turned translucent, rippling, and then he was gone, another shape sinking into the tide. The sea rose higher, curling around me, wrapping me in warmth and cold all at once. I should have been afraid. But instead I felt peace. Because beneath the roar and chaos, there was a lullaby, her voice pure and steady. Come home. I stepped forward. The ocean opened to receive me. My reflection stared back, not human anymore, but vast and fluid, eyes like moonlight on black water. She smiled. I smiled back. As I took the final step, the surface closed above my head. For a moment I was weightless, silent. Then I heard it, the heartbeat of the sea, echoing in perfect rhythm with my own. 1, 2, endless. And in that rhythm, the world exhaled. When the storm cleared, the hospital was gone. Only the cliffs remained, and the sound of the tide, calm, endless, whispering a name that no one remembered anymore. Elena. Or maybe it was just the wind. They said the hospital fell into the sea. That one night after the storm, the cliffs gave way, and the Atlantic swallowed everything, the wards, the chapel, the rusted instruments, all gone, like they were never there. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and slow, people say they still hear the generator hum. A light flickers where no structure stands. And if you stand too close to the edge, you'll hear footsteps behind you, steady, deliberate, like someone walking the empty halls, still on duty. That's what the locals say. I used to think stories like that came from grief, a way to make peace with what can't be explained. But now I'm not so sure. Because I've begun to dream again. In the dream, I'm back in New York. The city is impossibly quiet. The streets glisten with rain, but there are no cars, no voices, just the sound of the ocean, far away and near at once. I walk into the hospital, not the one in Maine, but the one I left behind years ago, where I once held my daughter for the last time. The lights buzz faintly. Every door is open, every bed empty. When I reach the end of the corridor, I see her. She's standing in front of room 317. The door is the same cold metal, rusted at the hinges, breathing with each wave of darkness. But this time she's smiling. It's not locked anymore, she says. Her voice is soft, like wind through a shell. I want to ask her what's behind the door, but before I can, I hear the sea again, not roaring but whispering. Calm, constant. I realize then that the door was never meant to be opened or closed. It was meant to listen. When I wake, my sheets are damp. The smell of salt lingers in the room. It's been months since I left Maine, but the ocean still follows me, in reflections, in mirrors, in the space between waking and sleep. Sometimes I see shapes in the puddles after rain. A silhouette in the water that moves when I don't. A flicker of white wings, a seagull, enormous, circling silently above the hospital that no longer exists. I've stopped telling people about it. They think I'm lucky to have survived. They don't understand that I didn't. Or maybe I did, and something else came back with me. I still wear the small pendant my grandmother gave me, a charm of salt and coral meant to ward off restless spirits. It's warm now, always warm. Sometimes it pulses faintly, like a heartbeat. I tell myself it's a trick of the nerves, the mind finding rhythm where there's none. But late at night, when the tide is high and the moon sinks low, I feel the pull deep, patient, familiar. The sea is waiting. Not as a monster, not as a god, but as a mirror. Everything that's ever been lost ends up there, names, faces, promises. Including mine. Last week, I visited the coast again. The path to the cliffs has eroded, but I knew the way by instinct. The air smelled of salt and decay, but it didn't frighten me anymore. I stood where the hospital used to be. The waves below moved gently, almost tenderly, and for a moment I thought I saw something beneath the surface, the faint outline of a window, a bed, a light still burning. Then as I turned to leave, I heard it faint, steady, like a heartbeat carried through the wind. Thump, thump. It matched my own. And I smiled, because I finally understood. I was never meant to close the door. I was meant to keep it, to guard it, to listen, so that the sea would remember mercy. That night the fog rolled in again. From my window I could see the water stretching endless and dark. The horizon was gone, sky and sea, one breathing body. And in the mist I saw her again. My daughter. Her hair moved like kelp in the tide. Her eyes glowed pale as the moon. She raised a hand not in farewell, but in invitation. I whispered her name, and when I blinked she was gone. Only the sound of the ocean remained calm, eternal, whispering against the rocks. Elena. A promise, not a warning. Now I sleep easily. If the sea calls, I'll answer. Not out of fear, but because I understand what it's asking. It doesn't want worship. It doesn't want blood. It only wants to be remembered. And I will remember. Until the tide takes me home.